This podcast discusses topics related to cults, including manipulation, psychological abuse, coercion, exploitation, and other forms of harmful behavior. Listener discretion is advised. Some episodes may contain descriptions of traumatic experiences, violence, sexual abuse, and mental health issues. If you are sensitive to these topics or have a history of trauma, please take care while listening. If you or someone you know is currently in a cult or experiencing abuse, please seek support from someone you trust, a mental health professional, or the authorities. Welcome to How Did We Get Here, the podcast where we dive deep and dissect the world of infamous and current cults and unearth the hidden psyche of their leaders. I'm Emily, your guide in this journey and a professional psych nurse. That being said, I'm not formally diagnosing anybody with anything on this show. I'm only coming from my experience and research when I talk about mental disorders or other psychological phenomena. Every week, we will examine the often overlooked allure of the macabre that has lured countless individuals into their fold. Together, we will delve into infamous cults like the Manson Family, People's Temple, and other lesser-known cults that just might be springing up in your neighborhood. In August 1969, a gruesome scene lay before law enforcement. Sharon Tate and her friends were murdered in her home, and their blood was used to spell the word pig on the walls of the house. Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten had beaten, stabbed, and shot the pregnant actress on the orders of Charles Manson, who wished to start a race war. How did we get here? Why did a lost soul want to cause so much bloodshed? It's a question that begs for an answer, and one we may never truly understand. Before delving into the horrors perpetrated by Charles Manson and his followers, let's start at the beginning. Charles Manson's childhood was marked by neglect, instability, and a series of unfortunate events that would eventually shape his twisted worldview. Born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, Charles Manson's early years were anything but ordinary. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was just 16 when she gave birth to him. Unable to care for him, she was often absent from his life. She would leave him to go on drinking binges and rob people. Kathleen was in and out of prison herself, leaving Charles to the care of his aunt and uncle. Manson never knew his biological father and took on his stepfather's last name, William Manson. William was a harsh disciplinarian, adding to the tumultuous environment of young Charles's upbringing. As a child, Manson was frequently in trouble with the law, spending his formative years bouncing between foster homes and juvenile detention centers. His mother sent him to Jabal, a school run by Catholic priests. He ran away from there twice. The first time, he ran home to his mother. She sent him back soon after. When he ran away the second time, he found himself a place to live and robbed stores to sustain himself. When he was caught, the judge sent him to the Indiana boys' school. He was physically and sexually assaulted there and had to act crazy to keep his assailants away. Manson ran away again and again until he finally went federal. During one escape attempt, he and some other boys drove a stolen car across state lines. When the boys were stopped in Utah, their run was over. He was sentenced to the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. At the National Training School for Boys, he was diagnosed with antisocial tendencies. People with antisocial tendencies have no regard for the rights of others and will violate them without a thought. These people tend to have no remorse, are aggressive and impulsive, and no desire to follow laws or hold down a job, and have no regard for the safety of self or others. When Charles was released from prison, he married a woman and had a child with her. Despite having a family, he could not stop stealing cars, forging bad checks, and pimping. After numerous arrests and probation violations, he faced 10 years in prison. During his time incarcerated, he picked up books on various religious leaders such as Buddha and Christ, and found the book How to Make Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Scientology also piqued Manson's interest. He also became obsessed with the Beatles' rise to popularity during this time and listened to their music. Despite his troubled youth, Manson dreamed of becoming a musician and moved to California to pursue his passion after his release from prison in 1967. Little did the world know that his journey to fame would take a dark and twisted turn. The late 1960s was a time of cultural upheaval and social unrest. The hippie counterculture arose as Vietnam and civil rights protests raged in the streets. Against this backdrop, Manson began to assemble his following, attracted disaffected young people with promises of love and enlightenment. Who were these girls? What was Charles Manson's type? Sandra Good was a young girl who wasn't sure what she wanted from life. She attended college at a few different spots, but never finished a particular degree. Leslie Van Outen was trying to find herself, whether it be through yoga or drugs. Mary Bruner was a quiet librarian who cared about the environment. Susan Atkins was a member of her church choir and became a hustler after her mother's death. Patricia Krenwinkel was trying to love herself after a youth of weight problems, her parents' divorce, and her sister's drug addiction. Charles Manson picked out women who he called bent, not broken. It's easy to run into the arms of someone being nice to you when you've had a rough youth. One of his followers, Diane Lake, described how Manson could make you feel special, like you were the only girl. Manson was good in the bedroom, too. All that oxytocin would definitely make you feel bonded to him, willing to follow him anywhere. Manson used LSD and loyalty tests to keep his followers close to him. One test he devised was called creepy crawling, where he'd break into houses but do nonviolent crimes, like just ever so slightly moving furniture. Charles Manson used the love and devotion of his followers to gain him some advantages. One of them was a connection to the Beach Boys. Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys picked up two young girls who were hitchhiking and brought them home. Those girls, in turn, brought their leader, Charles Manson, to the home. Dennis liked Charles' music and spent time smoking pot and playing music with him. Charles Manson was able to move himself and his followers into Dennis Wilson's home because of his magnetic personality. Wilson cared for the Manson family, even when a bout of gonorrhea spread throughout his home. Wilson liked Charles so much that he brought him to meet with his producers and record some songs at his studios. They liked his music, but not his words. Charles was unwilling to change his lyrics and fought with producers, even pulling a knife on them. They refused to make a deal with him, and Manson soon left Wilson's home. During this time, the Beatles' White Album was out. Manson was obsessed with its songs, namely Helter Skelter. Now, I was highly obsessed with the Beatles myself as a teenager. I remember reading that Paul McCartney had said that Helter Skelter was about the fall of the Roman Empire. I just went, huh, and went about my day. Charles Manson heard the song and decided it was sending a message to him to begin a race war. He was very obsessed with Armageddon and had decided that he would bring it about. He was planning to commit crimes against rich white people and blame African American people for it. This also came from a fear of Manson's that the Black Panthers were going to come after him. Manson had shot a man named Bernard Crowe during a fight about drug money. Manson believed that Crowe was a member of the Black Panthers. He hired a biker gang called the Straight Satans to protect him. Manson was paranoid that other members of the family would rat on him, so he decided to order his followers to commit a bunch of crimes as a form of mutually assured destruction. To keep the Straight Satans happy, one of the family members, Bobby Buzzolay, bought the mescaline from a man called Gary Hinman. The Straight Satans complained that the mescaline was bad, and so Buzzolay went to get his money back. Buzzolay fought Hinman and slashed his face, fleeing the scene afterwards. He later returned to kill him so he wouldn't call the cops. He drew a cat paw print in his blood to frame the Black Panthers. To keep Beausoleil out of trouble, someone suggested doing a copycat crime so the police would believe that there was a spree killer on the loose. They picked a house that belonged to one of the producers named Terry Melker, who snubbed Manson and refused to do a record with him. Only Terry Melker didn't own that property anymore. Movie producer Roman Polanski and his pregnant wife, actress Sharon Tate, did. Sharon Tate and a few of her friends were having a party at the house when family members Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins came and murdered them all. One of the girls later recalled that Sharon Tate was begging and begging for her life and her child's. She was saying, "Please, I just want to have my baby. Please don't hurt me." They callously replied with, "We don't give a fuck that you're pregnant." When they were all dead, the word pig, as inspired by the White Album track Piggies, was written on the wall in their blood. There was a heartbreaking picture of Polanski kneeling in front of the bloody message. Not too long after the murders, Polanski produced the movie Macbeth. This version of the Scottish play was the one my high school English teacher had us watch after reading it. Of course, people die in the play no matter how you spin it, but I remember the movie being incredibly gory. Like, Macbeth's death scene was over the top. My teacher said that Polanski had made it this way because he was still grieving his wife's death. The next night, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a grocery store chain owner, met the same fate as Tate and her friends. People believe that Manson chose this couple as he still needed money to give back to the straight Satans. It was a long time before the Manson family was connected to the murders. Members were arrested for car theft and credit card fraud and other little crimes. While in jail, Susan Atkins made a joke about the Tate LaBianca murders, and suddenly everything unfolded. Manson and his followers went on trial for the murders. Manson famously carved an X into his head, as did a few of his followers, and said, "I've X'd myself from your world." During the trial, Manson described what he believed would happen. He thought that the Revolution 9 track from the Beatles' White Album was actually related to a line out of the Book of Revelations from the Bible. It spoke of a bottomless pit, and Manson believed he and his followers had hid in the bottomless pit during the race war that would happen. Eventually, they would reemerge and build a better world. Manson defended his actions and his followers' actions, saying that society had dumped him and he acted accordingly. Manson and his followers were sentenced to death, but those sentences became life sentences after California banned the death penalty in 1972. Manson eventually passed away in 2017, still in prison. During his time in prison, his followers still worshipped him like the godlike figure they believed him to be. He managed to acquire followers while still in prison. Now that we know the content of what happened, we have to ask ourselves why. From the beginning, Charles Manson was a lonely soul. His parents were barely there for him. He had very little to guide him through developing into a person. Even when he lived at his aunt and uncle's, a more stable environment, he was still being bullied at school. In those days, kids just fought it out. There were no campaigns for bullying awareness as there are today. Even in his adult life, he probably didn't even care for the girls he surrounded himself with. Sure, he wasn't lonely anymore, but he used his skills as a pimp to pick them up and got free love out of it. He built them up into who he wanted them to be and made them do horrible things to avoid accountability for his own terrible actions. He wasn't picking up girls from stable homes, that's for sure. Charles Manson, famously known for heinous crimes, but What drove him to commit such atrocities? Some say, in the end, he asked himself, why bother having regard for others when nobody has any regard for me? And that's how he got here. Thank you for tuning in to How Did We Get Here? Please join us again next week as we explore another dangerous cult, the movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay safe. Bye.